Welcome to the Aztlander, and tonight's presentation is Nicholas Helmuth with his discovery of the tomb of the Jade Jaguar.
Okay, the burial has two names. The tomb of the Jade Jaguar is one name, and burial 196. It's usually just called BU period 196. So we'll be talking about that a lot. And the reason for calling it the tomb of the Jade Jaguar is this remarkable. It's about this size. So it's not the size of a jaguar because you don't get jade in that size. Now we'll be talking a lot about jade tonight, and keep in mind that jade is a generic word and that jadeite is a mineral, but there are lots more, so it's more complicated because what all of us used to call jade or jadeite, now today, every time I see an archaeological report on what they dug up in the tomb, we're finding out that it's much of the green stone is not jadeite, it's other minerals. So I'm just going to call this jade, but until it's analyzed again, we don't know physically what it is. Now notice in the eye, the hieroglyph, that is the hieroglyph for jaguar, or at least feline. So this is very cool. Even though it doesn't have spots, this is very clearly a jaguar. Pumas are sometimes shown, and that's another lecture I've given is of the 5 different felines, but for now, let's just stick with this as a jaguar. This is obviously at Tikal. The tomb itself was to the right of Temple 2. We're looking at the front of Temple 1 and the back of Temple 2. And of course, I'll be showing maps and all that type of stuff later. Now, one of the key aspects of burial 196 is who was he? Because there's a vase in that burial in 196 that almost every epigrapher has said talks about ruler B. The guy under Temple 1 is ruler A. So in theory, according to epigraphers, the body I dug up is ruler B. I beg to disagree, because ruler B would have had enough money and power to put himself under Temple 4 or Temple 3 or Temple 5. You know, he wouldn't have put himself under a little tiny little pyramid with no temple on top. So we'll get into that. But one thing we can say is that burial 196 is similar and sometimes identical to the burial under Temple 1. And although I'm sure that there are archaeologists who know lots of other sites, and they may know other instances of burials being similar, I'm frankly not aware of any 2 royal burials being as similar as these 2. We're going to point that out. So at the left, we have burial 116 from ruler A. Obviously, I did not dig up that burial. It was dug up by Trick many years before. And we're going to talk about burial 196. So I'm leaving it open. I don't believe it was ruler B. I believe he was a son or brother of ruler A, but not necessarily ruler B. Now notice in the picture of the burial 196, there is a lot of metal scaffolding. That's because when I entered the burial, it was totally collapsed. You couldn't see anything in there at all but fallen wall stones, vault stones, ceilings, everything. So when we excavated it, we needed that metal scaffolding for 2 reasons. One is to keep more stones from falling on us. And the other thing was so that I could put a board across the burial. So I could put an actual platform, and that way I could excavate this burial by lying down flat on a mattress and just having my hands over the edge to excavate it bit by bit. And this, to my knowledge, is the only burial in the Mayan area that was ever excavated without having to walk through it. How are you going to walk through this without destroying it? So we put the scaffolding in before anything was removed. And we knew from other burials that the corner would not have anything in it. So we put the post down in the corner, and you'll see a little bit more of that later on. So here's burial 116 on the left, 196 on the right, and we're going to see there are spondylus shells. Just back real quickly, you can see here on the tomb of the Jade Jaguar, you see rows of those pink shells. We're going to be talking about those more often. In both tombs, they occur in rows. So shell, 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 shell. And we'll learn from a work by Mary Miller why they're in a row and what they were worn for. It's frankly quite amazing. Now notice the two burials are kind of flipped. So my burial had the lower area at the right, and the Temple 1 burial had the lower area at the left. That's something for somebody else to work out why that aspect differed. The Temple 1 burial had a lot of petate, woven, palm frond woven material. Our burial probably had it, but it was all rotted. So we were not able to show that as Trick was able to show it. So let's move in here now. Again, a similarity on the left and on the right. On the right is the one I dug up, and on the left is the one in Temple 1. So again, you have two, these are made out of wood with jade mosaic glued onto it, and they're lidded, so you pull the lid off. But again, how many other tombs? I don't know of any tomb that has these, and I don't know of anything quite like this, because of course, as a mosaic, when you find it, this is what it looks like when you find it. So you can see down below, you can see the, the head falling off, but getting back to the full thing. So when I saw that busted up part, I had to figure out how to get that back to the lab so that William Coe could put it back together. And so what I did is I put something basically under it, and basically we took the whole thing back as a clump so that all the pieces would be in their original position. Because if I had picked up each piece and put it in a box, how would you get it back together again? You don't know which piece is at the top and which piece is at the bottom. So again, every aspect of this excavation, keep in mind, I never dug a tomb before. I'm 19 years old. And even though I'm at Harvard, I mean, they don't teach how do you dig a royal tomb when you're at Harvard. Now, one thing I'd like to show is, notice the difference in color. Now, of course, a lot of that depends on color management. In other words, the one on the right was taken with a certain type of light, and the one on the left was taken with another type of light. But basically, they're very different in color. And if you look at the one on the left, a lot of those stones are reused from other jade things. And they're probably not all jadeite or whatever this material is. So again, that's a lot of work for some very good mineral specialist to go in. Every piece of greenstone dug up at Tikal and Washington needs to be totally reanalyzed. That should be someone's PhD to go in there and reanalyze every single piece of jade from Washington at Tikal and early stuff from other sites, because in the old days, we just called it jade or jadeite. But now we know that it's more complicated than that. Okay, so again, here it is, fallen down. On the far right is a piece of alabaster. We'll look at that later on. Now, another thing that's very similar is these are large plates, and the Tikal burial had 3 of these, and the burial I dug up had 10 of them. So 10 identical size and shape of plate. And let's go through these. Now, keep in mind that in the middle, and some of these you have a con cross, and in others you have maybe, a keen sign or whatever, but they all are ringed by what's called dress shirt design, because, keep in mind that in the 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s, nobody had identified any of this stuff. So they called it a dress shirt for whatever reason. but we now know it's probably the tail feather, the end of a tail feather of an ocellated turkey. So let's go in here. You can see the plates themselves. And again, sometimes the middle is empty, and sometimes there are other things. And again, there's kind of a three-part flower there. But again, here you get, another glyphic plate, but over and over 10 of these things. Here you can see the bottom. This one is from Temple 1, but you can see what they look like. And here from the burial under Temple 1, you get 3 of them. And 2 of them have the Khan sign, and another one has kind of like an eyeball. And here's where I found them in the tombs. You can see there in the front, you can see about 3 of them. And if you later on, we'll see the whole thing. Also notice that stone has fallen on a lot of stuff, and notice it's fallen on some black vases. There are 3 of those black vases. So what's interesting about this burial is over and over again, there are repeated copies of the identical vase in the tomb. So not just 1 black vase, but 3, and they're absolutely identical. And not just 1 plate, there are 10 of them. And we're going to see that there's other stuff that there's multiple examples. And what I think the reason is, and here all 10 from the one I dug up, what I'm estimating, this is only an estimate, that when a man of this status dies, he's the son or brother of ruler A. Whether he's ruler B, that's irrelevant. He's the son or brother of ruler A. He has a lot of power. And he will have people coming to render homage to him. So he probably has to lie in state, just like Queen Elizabeth's been sitting there now for a week. This guy probably sat around for about a week too, because people have to come in from far away. And they have to get in there. So my estimate is that many of these royalty that came in to visit him and ambassadors, they each brought one of these plates. That is, these plates held certain things that were necessary for the burial. That's just a suggestion. But why 10 of them? Again, because these were a special kind of a plate. And here's some more. Now, the other thing is, when you have a burial in the future, what needs to be done, because all this stuff is pretty much broken up, in the future, a burial like this needs to have a chemist and a botanist inside the burial taking samples. So obviously, any vase that had something physically in it, I took all that and put it into a bag and took it to the lab. But in the future, that needs to be done with much, much, much more care. And the problem is that I'll talk to you about one of the vases in a couple of minutes. That probably had cacao beans in it. And I have never seen any Tikal project analysis of that material. So whether someone lost it or they were too busy, I have no idea. Or maybe it was published, I just haven't found it. But again, that's very important in the future. Every one of these vases, of course, obviously most of the stuff inside has fallen in there from the wall. Now here on the picture on the right, you can see a paintbrush. That's one of the brushes I used. Most of the brushes I used to excavate the burial were the size of the miniature little brushes, the tiny, tiny, tiny brushes. So literally, that's why it took weeks and weeks. To my knowledge, the excavation of this burial took the longest of any burial at Tikal. And I bet 10 times longer than any burial at Washington, because the standard practice is artifacts, number them, name them, put them in a bag, and then that's it. But nowadays, we have to learn there's more in a burial than the artifacts. There's information. And again, a lot of that information is inside each of these pots. But again, here you can see all the broken plates that they very carefully. So here's a broken plate on the left in the tomb, and there's a different plate provisionally reconstructed. Now here we're back at the same picture we saw before. And now what we want to talk about is the vases in the back left. You see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Altogether, there are 13 of these vases. There are 13 of these. In other words, again, we have 10 plates, almost identical. And now we have 10 vases, almost identical. So again, just an estimate, every visiting ambassador, dignitary, ruler who came in, family member, they kind of made offerings of predetermined things, not just any miscellaneous thing, but they made an offering of a plate and they made an offering of the vase, or maybe one bunch of people made an offering of the plates and another level of royalty made offerings of these vases. So let's look at these vases now. So here are the rollout drawings. Again, there were 13 of these. And what's interesting is some of them were done by totally incompetent illustrators. I mean, so here, the ones at the top, by the way, the two vases at the top, those show a different deity. The vases at the bottom show a deity with the upper lip hanging down. So we're kind of going to skip the two vases at the top and go into, and what I want to show is, look at the last vase down there at the lower right. It's done by a child. I'm not an artist. If you ask me to design one of these vases, I'd probably do something like the one on the top left. But what you see is that every vase is a copy. So on the left, the vase on the left is the pure, beautiful, perfect, done by a master artist. That vase is in Temple 1. And all the copies are in Burial 196. So the first one in Burial 196 is clearly a simplified copy of the Tikal one. And then every other design in the burial I dug up is a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy. So the ones at the last, the one at the far right, whoever did that, he only saw the one in front. And the guy who did the one in front, he only saw the one in front of that. So everybody who's doing these, they only saw the vase done by the incompetent person in front of them. So the question is, what causes this? Because keep in mind, to my knowledge, and I could be wrong if there's a ceramic expert listening in, please correct me at the end of the lecture. I have never seen or heard of any comments by a ceramic expert of this idea of copying. Is it that somebody had the model, Temple 1, and then somebody else copied that, copied that, copied that, copied that, and the people that kept copying them never saw the original one at all. So does that mean there's a workshop set up in Tikal? So all the people come in and a workshop is set up and everybody sits around and has to, in other words, each of the visitors has to decorate their own thing. In other words, not just buying one, but is it expected that every royal visitor decorate the actual pot that they're going to give to the tomb? Again, I can't answer that, but boy, do we have to raise that question, because I've never seen a scene as incompetently drawn on a Mayan vase as the one on the far right. So again, that's pretty amazing. Now, also, the same thing happened in Temple 1, except in Temple 1 it's with painted vases. So at the top left, there's the master painter. At the top left, that is pure upper class royal style. You know, and all these things are under Temple 1. And then every other one is kind of a copy. Now, they're not as copy as the carved ones in my burial. But if you see the ones on the right, they're pretty crude. You know, they're missing a lot of stuff. And the style is completely homemade. So it's all authentic Maya. But again, the idea is, I would like to suggest that people are copying certain scenes in order to give the correct scene, but they're doing it in a hurry. They're just cranking them out as if there's a workshop set up just to crank the stuff out for the burial. So everyone comes in and does it really quickly. They fire the vases, they fill it with whatever goodies you got to fill in, put them in the tomb. Again, that's just an idea. Okay, let's talk about mirrors. So the largest mirror, number 45, I think that's one of the largest mosaic mirrors ever found. And these are iron pyrite or some other kind of similar material. And they're like a mirror. And they are, number 45 was stuccoed. So I couldn't lift it up. So we had to dig around it. And we took the whole block from the tomb and the whole thing by hand to the lab 3 or 4 miles away. And there they were able to restore it. So in the museum today, you can see the underside is about 20 or 30% preserved in stucco. So number 54 is mosaic, number 55 is mosaic, and number 52. So there are 4 mirrors. So this guy must have liked to look at himself. And then in the in Temple 1, there is mirror. Let's see if we get to a close up here. Here we go. So in Temple 1, there are 2 mirrors at the left and 1 mirror at the right. So there are 3 mirrors there and 4 mirrors in my tomb. But again, look at the similarity. I mean, how many royal burials do you get 3 or 4 mirrors? Now keep in mind, it's not easy to identify a mirror because the iron pyrite or whatever it's made out of, when it gets moist, it kind of rots. And so unless it's in pretty good condition, you wouldn't notice it. But again, over and over and over again, the things are similar. Now also, look at the pile of bones on the lower left under Temple 1, and the drawing on the right, number 42, there's a pile of bones there too. So we'll see more of that in a close-up later on. Now here's something we only found in burial 196. These are the 4-petaled flowers. And when they were found, nobody had identified these. They called them rabbit ears. Again, the ceramics specialists, they know ceramics better than I do, but they could not identify any of this stuff. So I worked for year after year. I probably drove 5, 6, 7, 8, 9,000 kilometers in Guatemala. Every week, almost every 2 or 3 months, I would drive to a different part of Guatemala to try to find 4-petaled flowers. Because I knew they were 4-petaled flowers. I just didn't know what species they were. And then year after year after year, this is my style. When I want to do something, I do it. Year after year, we found here are the flowers. So some of them are sepals. So the top left, that's a water lily. That has 4 sepals because it doesn't have 4 petals, but all the others are 4-petaled flowers. And if you notice, they're not all similar, and nor are the designs on the Maya vases. See, they're different too. So you have 1 4-petaled thing on the left and 1 4-petaled thing on the right. But again, whenever I want to identify something, I do what it takes. And again, it was year after year, field trip after field trip, driving kilometer after kilometer through every part of Guatemala. When I saw a 4-petaled flower, got out of the car and did macro photography. And it turns out that All the yellow four-petal flowers are swamp and river flowers. So they grow at the edge of rivers or in swamps. And considering the surface of the underwater world, it doesn't surprise me that water-related things. And also, if you notice on the yellow four-petal flowers, there are 4 sepals behind the petals. And again, those are many of these are models. Of course, you have to keep in mind that if you look at 100 burials, you're going to find 10, 15, 20 different flowers. So again, we've worked hard to do that. Here's one of the vases. These are my photographs. And here's a rollout by Justin Kerr. And it shows, again, we assume that's some sort of food. And various people have, suggested, it's a tamal, whatever. We really do need to have better documentation about what's in these ceramic containers, because when you get into the end, this is not an enema scene, but when you get into the enema scenes, there are things like this sticking out of the enema jars. And again, this is not an enema scene, and there are no enema jars here, but we have to learn what that food material is. Here's a rollout drawing from the University of Pennsylvania. Here's another one of the vases, again, a rollout drawing from Justin Kerr. And I believe this is the inscription. The Tikal emblem glyph is up at the top right. And somewhere on here, I believe it identifies the individual as ruler B. But what I would point out is that maybe ruler B put one of his own vases in here. Maybe this is a brother of ruler B. So it could be ruler B. But if I were ruler B, I would want to be buried under Temple 4, or at least Temple 3 or Temple 5. I wouldn't want to be stuck under a pyramid that didn't have any temple on top. So here we go. Now what we're looking at here, this is a close-up. The jug that is in front of the hands of the butterfly guy, that is kind of like an enema jug. It's not as big as the full enema jug. It's more like the portable. It's a little bit bigger than the portable ones, but it's pretty close to an enema jug, although most enema jugs are about 1 meter high. They're much, much, much bigger. So I would not immediately call this an enema jug. But whatever is in it is pretty fragrant and pretty yummy for the tummy. Now, in front of that is some kind of a container that holds sprigs of something. And we don't know, those appear to be flowers. And there are many times the Maya hold a bouquet of flowers and they're actually sniffing it. Keep in mind, there are dozens, if not hundreds, of very tasty flowers that have aroma and other aspects that make you very happy. So here's the guy that's smoking. He looks pretty happy, dancing and trancing here. And there's the rollout by the University of Pennsylvania. And again, here's 3 vases. So again, instead of 1, there are 3. So clearly, this size and shape of a black vase had some meaning. And it had enough meaning that 3 people, unless one guy gave 3 of them, but I think rather that 3 different people each gave 1 of them. And there's a miscellaneous vase on the left. And here's, we usually call this alabaster, but that better a geologist should name that. And I believe there was one of these in Temple 1 as well. And normally these are covered with stucco paint, but these were not. Now we did find a wooden vase that was covered with stucco. And when the tomb collapsed, the stone from the wall fell on the stuccoed wooden vase, and the stucco of the top of the vase stayed in the stone. The vase disintegrated over the following 1,000 years. So from various aspects of the collapse, we know that this tomb collapsed within a year or so of it being built because of the pressure, all the weight pushing down. In other words, when they built the tomb, they were in a hurry. They had a lot of construction. and they were kind of in a hurry to get it done. And of course, nobody outside saw what happened inside. Now here's the Jade Jaguar from the top. Notice it has, I'm not sure I would call that a water lily. Of course, these are always called water lily Jaguars, but this particular design is not very water lily-like. And to the left of him is the steel that I put in there. But on the right of him, that kind of crumply paper stuff, that's Jaguar hide. So this guy, what we know from Tikal and this guy, they were buried wearing many different separate outfits. So he's not just buried wearing his pajamas. He's got different, keep in mind, every ceremony required a different outfit. And he was probably wrapped up with multiple outfits. So he could go into the underworld with the appropriate stuff for multiple rituals that they assumed he would continue to do once he got into the underworld. So again, lots of jade. And then you can see on the left, that's the mosaic thing. And you can see the guy has a necklace. Notice all the red color, that's cinnabar. That's mercuric sulfide. That's one of the deadliest materials in the entire Mayan area. In fact, I've read some things that think that one of the causes of problems in the late classic Maya is the amount of cinnabar that they used washed into the reservoirs. Keep in mind that every drop of rain that fell on a plaza washed into the reservoirs, and that's what they drank during the dry season, because during the dry season there's no rain. So I worked in this burial week after week, breathing in cinnabar. Why I'm alive, I have no idea. If I act a little weird, I'll blame it on cinnabar, because man, nobody really told me how deadly it was. And so, I just breathe, and you're digging the stuff, the powder's all over the place. So I can blame some of my idiocies on having imbibed too much cinnabar. Here are the guy's teeth. You can tell that they drilled holes. Now to drill a hole, of course, well, the Maya knew how to drill into jade, so they obviously knew how to drill into teeth. Dr. Guillermo Mata, if any of you are interested in teeth, Dr. Guillermo Mata has written a lot. And Dr. Jose Molina Muniz has also written, I think, a thesis or a dissertation on Maya jade implants on teeth. So Dr. Molina is one of the doctors that operated on me 6 weeks ago. And when I first met him, he gave me a copy of his thesis. So again, this is the jaw of the guy. This guy's got better teeth than I do. I've lost about half my teeth from drinking, sugar cola, which kills your teeth. Now this guy's got a lot more teeth than I do. I mean, then here's a rectangular jade bead. And notice the shell. We're going to talk about that more later. But again, the forehead of the guy is all covered with cinnabar. And then he had a jade thing around his forehead. And then you can see small earrings there. He had two sets of earrings. He had one that he wore, and he had another one that was put near him. So on the left, that's his second set of earrings. So again, he was buried with many different separate outfits. Now on the right is the tomb under Temple 1. And these are not my photos, they're from University of Pennsylvania. But if you notice that on the right, the earring there is almost identical to the earrings I dug up. So each of these guys was buried with pretty much the same necklace and the same earrings, except my guy had two sets of earrings. And notice that on this Temple 1, there's a large seashell, looks kind of like a cup above his head. And notice on the right, below the earring, that's a spondylus shell. We'll talk about that later on. Now, here are the spondylus shells. On the left, you can see they're in a row, 1 row, 2 rows, 3 rows. And in Temple 1, they also occur in rows, one below. So, of course, obviously in 1965, I said, Why are they on temple 1? There's 1, 2, 3 rows, and my guy had at least 3 rows because someone got knocked out of place. So why are each of these guys wearing rows? And we'll see that later on. That slide's not in, but we're going to see later on, hopefully, the vase that show basically, and hope later on that vase that we didn't throw away that slide. Mary Miller found a vase in Dumbarton Oaks that showed a person sticking a stingray spine in his penis, and he's wearing these outfits. So the spondylus shells were to show that's the outfit for when, if you were a king, you would often wear these when you stuck it in your phallus. You'd often wear other things they do on the Ashkelon. Let's go ahead here. Again, the jade all over the place. Again, this is temple 1, jade all over the place. Now notice temple 1 also has several outfits. So on temple 1, he has one necklace on his body of rectangular beads, and then he has a necklace of round spherical ones thrown onto his body. So again, it's the same thing. Each of these kings had different outfits, not thrown into the barrel, but put into the burial with them. And again, so there's, I think that's temple 1 on one side, the guy dug up on the other side. So again, the similarities are remarkably similar. And I don't think that's really been pointed out in very many of the Tikal project reports. And one of the dreams I have is to try to get all the photographs that I had a Leica camera. So the ones you're seeing now are taken with my Leica. We also had a Rolleiflex, which is 2 1/4, 2 1/4, 120 film. And we have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pictures. And what I would like to do someday is republish this burial with every photograph I took. To my knowledge, this is the most photographed burial ever excavated at Tikal or Washington. There's no other excavator who focused on photography. Because I wanted to be sure that I recorded everything. So I photographed day after day after day after day. But that would require, obviously, going up to the University of Pennsylvania. I would need an archaeology student with me and funds and all that type of stuff. But that is a dream to publish this in much more detail. Here's some of the jade. So again, he had 2 earrings. The big earrings were the ones that were thrown to one side of the guy I dug up. And then the smaller earrings are the ones that he actually wore. And then the round, flat items went around his head. And the other jades were his necklace. He also had jade here, of course, jade bracelets. And you can see the spondylus shell there. Notice again, a lot of the red color. Okay, now this is his jade penis. Because remember, if you're a king and have to stick those stingray spines into your penis every couple of weeks, there's probably not much of your penis left. So my joke was, the reason he's buried with a jade penis is he didn't have the real one left because he had stuck too many holes in it. That's a joke. Okay, so here is his pelvis, and he has 2 stingray spines, diagonal. Notice they're totally soaked in cinnabar. And by the way, his jade thingy is not totally phallic shape, but I mean, it's kind of obvious. It's a substitute for his real item. You can't get much more phallic than having it sticking out like that with 2 stingray spines crossing it. And these are the stingray spines. So again, imagine passing this thing through your dinghy. Well, keep in mind, they had every kind of a plant. So they would have eaten enough plants in probably wouldn't have noticed what they were doing to their phallus. But that also needs to be worked on, another research project. Oh yeah, okay, here's the vase. So this is by Mary Miller. And normally it's a woman that does it through the tongue, but here's a guy doing it through his tongue. And there's the man. And notice he has strings all down his body. And those are the spondylus shells. So this publication by Mary Miller of Yale University, she's now at the Getty Institute, show exactly what this guy wore when he did his penis thing. Now keep in mind, the rulers of Yaxchilan on the lintels, they're wearing something totally different. So clearly there were different types of perforation rituals. So he's doing it wearing very simple clothing, and the person in front of him is a man, not a woman. Normally it's a woman who puts it through her tongue. And the reason you have to put a rope through your tongue is you have to prove this whole, you put a hole in it with your thing. And he's got, the pointed object sticking out of his phallus. That must have been pretty rough. Okay, here are the shells. And again, there are many different species. I'm not a specialist in that. So some come from, far away Panama. Others come from, closer up to Guatemala. But the Maya had long distance trade, but really would help to have documentation of exactly what species these are and where they come from. I mean, it's one thing to say it's yada, genus and species, but you have to indicate where do they come from? How far did the Maya have to go to bring those up? And again, we talked about the shell headdress. Here it is on the left, the shell, pretty big shell covering his head like this. And the other one is kind of knocked off. But again, over and over again, identical aspects of these two burials. And again, certainly other archaeologists surely have found somewhere else burials this identical to each other. But at Holmul, or I mean, there's so many places they're finding burials now. It would really help to, to work all this out. Here's kind of a toolkit for the gentleman I dug up. And notice they're kind of like pinchers. Some of the things are pinchers. Other thing looks like open your tuna fish can. And these are various tools. I don't see any scribal tools, but again, some expert could tell me that these are definitely tools, and again, more like pinchers. And on the left is the one from the burial Temple 1. So each of these burials had a set of tools, and it would help if there are any professors listening to this, you might suggest to your students that they do a master's thesis or an undergraduate thesis to pull these tools apart, because the one at Tikal, of course, they're all scrunched up together, but pull out every tool and show how many different tools were in Temple 1 and how many different tools were in burial I dug up, how many were similar and how many were different, and what were these tools used for? Why were they buried? Is this ruler going to have to do things when he's in trying to get out of Shibaba? Okay, now real quick, how do you get into burial like this? Well, most tombs are on the central axis of a pyramid. And even though I was 19 years old and a student, we all knew where the burials were. So it was very easy. So that's the center. So that's the stairway. So basically you just very carefully dig it out. You measure every stone, you make a drawing. So here's the outer stairway. Notice there are two inner stairways, and those are called construction stairways, okay? So here's a draw. This is a drawing I did, and notice that you can see the different stairways. So there's 1, 2, 3 construction stairways, and then the final stairways. And we'll learn what this open area is in just a minute. So here we are digging day after day because you need to measure everything. And now we're under the middle of the pyramid. You notice we have electrical lighting. We have a generator outside. And look at what I found. I found an opening. And I said, wow. I stuck my head in that hole, and this is what I saw. Wow. It's 1 meter high and 5 meters wide. I said, wow. I found the whole dynasty, the king and the queen and all the kids. Because this cavity is larger than a tomb for a single person. I said, Jesus, boy, that's amazing. When I look at the right smack, this is right in the middle of the pyramid on the central axis. So I began very carefully digging every single bit out. And you can see that I had to dig almost not quite 1 meter of material. It turned out that 100% of what I had found was bat crap. I had found the largest mass of 1,000-year-old bat droppings of any archaeologist. Now, how did the bats get in here? What we learned is we turned around and noticed there was another tunnel going out. So we hit the tunnel, then we turned around, and it turned out this was a looter's trench 1,000 years ago. And the reason we didn't see it when we started excavation is because the pyramid had collapsed and covered over. The looters knew where the tomb was, just like we did. We knew it was on the central axis. But they dug in diagonally because that's shorter. Why should they waste time digging through the front steps? But since we need to study the architecture, we needed to dig through the front steps. So here I am. And all the time, and I found 1.5 tons of bat crap. So what am I supposed to tell William Coe, the project director? Hello, Dr. Coe, I'm kind of sorry. I spent like all these months carefully digging, measuring every stone. All I found was bat droppings. I will not repeat to you what he would have said to me. So I said, okay, Nicholas, you've come this far. You have nothing to lose. It can't get any worse. You found nothing. So keep digging. Dig out the other end. So where you see the meter stick, I dug 36 centimeters and found the tomb. The looters, probably about 900. The looters had missed the tomb by 36 centimeters. They had given up. I don't give up. So I dug on, and on the floor, that's the plaza floor, I found pieces of chert. It's often called flint, but it's actually chert. And we know that most Maya royal tombs of the Central Petén, they put chert in the fill as an offering. The minute I found that chert, I knew the tomb was there. So we dug down diagonally and there was the tomb. Right smack, there's the tomb, the whole tomb. So the grave robbers gave up. I didn't give up. Now here we're in the burial. Notice a lot of it's collapsed. And fortunately, we were able to enter at the end, the edge of the burial. Notice that the vault of this burial does not go up to a capstone. We're going to see more of that later. This burial is vaulted, but they gave up and didn't finish the vault. They put wood over it. They put a wooden roof on it. Why? Because part of the guy was smelling so bad. They wanted us to cover it up and get out of there. So let's go here now. So here's the drawing. The great big hole, that's where the 2.5 tons of bat droppings were. And then there's the, again, the 30-something centimeters. And then we found the chert dug down diagonally right smack into the tomb. So there's my architectural drawing of the tomb. We'll get into detail there. And the tomb was on the central axis, but it was off axis perfectly for us. In other words, instead of our tunnel falling through the roof, we were able to come in at one end, and that was very, very helpful. So here, again, you can see where the burial is relative to the central axis. So it's a little bit off. Here's the other side. And again, notice the top had Palo de Tinto roof ceiling. So here's a drawing. So you see the edge that they dug down. You see the wooden roof, totally wooden roof. And the dotted line, that is a cloth that they, when they finished the wall, they put a cloth all the way from the cutting, when they put the trench in to put the tomb in. They did the wall first, then they put not a finished floor, but they put plaster over it. Then they put a cloth on top of that, and then they started the vault because they didn't want any of the plaster or cement from the vault to fall on the tomb. And we're going to go into that bit by bit. So here's what they had to dig through. So this is the plaza, the floor is up at the top. So they dug down like this. And then down in that area is where they put a little bench, and then they put the bundle. After they put the wall, they put the tomb in. And then that cloth. Now that cloth, we've got it raised up so you can see it, but that actually went over the wall. The presence of that cloth and the fact that the vault was plastered by sloppiness by hand, and is what led me to document that the burial was inserted before the vault was started. So the burial was put in when the walls were finished, when they could easily climb in and out. William Coe, I respect his work. He refused to accept that. He said they built the vault and lowered everything down through the hole in the vault. I mean, why would they do that? I mean, you want to put all that stuff in there, you put it in when just the walls are up. And why did they put the cloth across? And then why did they build the vault so sloppily? So again, I respect William Coe, who's a very capable archaeologist, but he didn't work in this tomb week after week after week, day after day after day, hour after hour, analyzing every single aspect. And so again, the sequence of construction is fairly certain that the body was put in before the vault was started. And again, here's plaster all over the place. And that's another reason that it would be very helpful to get all the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of photographs that are at the University Museum, have them scanned, and then make them available to publish them in full size so the entire world can see what we actually documented here. Because what we documented in this burial really needs to be shown to the world. So here's the Quickie Vault, just 3 stones. Then above that, they put the wooden roof on. And the wooden roof, there were still palo de tinto. We could still see the butts were still there. And some of the pieces of wood, the cross beams, some of those, because they had fallen down the middle, but the ends of those things were still there. So again, we have pretty good information. Again, if you're ever going to do a burial like this before, get all the food out of every vase. Obviously get DNA, but that can be done after the burial is put in the lab. And obviously nowadays do 3D scans of everything, and also have a physical anthropologist and lots of other specialists in the burial, looking at stuff, not just looking at it in the lab months later. You got to get the specialist into the tomb to see what's going on. And again, I remember I talked to you about putting a floor there. So again, this was a unique way to excavate the burial. And again, it was day after day, week after week. Again, it's probably the longest excavation of any tomb at Tikal or Washington, because again, doing little brushes. And the other advantage of the boards here is I didn't have to walk on the tomb floor, and I could take really good pictures. You could put the boards up above and take pictures straight down. Here in yellow, it shows where the structure is. Unfortunately, 90 or 99% of the 3D reconstructions of Tikal at the park and at every museum in the world are incorrect. They show this as having a temple. Never had a temple. They also show structure 37 and structure 39 on the East Plaza. They never had a temple. I excavated the entire side of the East Plaza. I know every one of those buildings. There was not a temple on any one of them. 38 was a palace, but 37 and 39 and 73 never had any buildings. So I hope in the future, every book can be cleansed and those drawings can be reconstructed to show that not every pyramid at Tikal had a structure on top of it. Here are my architectural drawings. So you have the front steps. Notice there are zigzag stairs on the side. These are called inset stairways. They're found on Temple 2. They're found on Temple 1. And the reason I knew about these inset steps is I excavated the northeast corner of Temple 1 because it was facing the area I was excavating on the East Plaza. So I was excavating a palace that was literally abutting against Temple 1. So I excavated that corner and found that stairway. And those zigzag stairways are very typical. So here I am with a handmade thing measuring everything. And here's one of our helpful workers. So that's the temple pyramid on the right, and that's the central Acropolis on the left. So we dug, there was only about 1.5 meters between them, but because the stones all fell down, that part of the pyramid was relatively well preserved, and that's where I found it had those stairways. So again, here's where we dug in between them and got a lot of information from that. We were taking some measurements. This is what the pyramid looked like, well, what it looks like today and what it looked like in those days. It faces the side of Temple 2. And again, this is my isometric drawing. This is a hand-done drawing showing you can see the steps going up zigzag. On Temple 1, the steps kind of go up the first couple of terraces. We're not really sure where they went up all the higher terraces. And the purpose of these stairs, I assume, was to get people to clean the terraces and also during ceremonies to get people with trumpets up on up on there to do, to make music and do ceremonies and all that kind of stuff. And I'm sure there are a lot of other pyramids that have them, but if I understand correctly, Temple 5 does not have them, and they've not been found on Temple 4 or Temple 3. Now, the same inset stairways, I found them on this structure. This is structure 5D37 facing the East Plaza. I excavated the entire structure month after month, and we found inset stairways on the back of it and inset stairways on the front of it. So the inset stairways are something pretty rare to Tikal, and inset stairways are shown in graffiti, but they're usually misinterpreted. They're usually called a ladder. No, they're not a ladder. They're physical stairways set into the pyramid. Okay, so that's it. These are, you can download all this stuff. There's a 1-volume download. I think it's about 400 pages, and that's my Harvard thesis with some extra photos stuck in. I think the thesis itself is about 200 pages, but then to get some of the data out, I added a lot more. So again, that's about 400 pages. And again, what we'd like to do is have even more. We would like to have total coverage, because half of the information is still in my head. I mean, yes, there are field notes. Yes, there are hundreds of photos, but most of it's still in my head. And I'd like to get it out of my head. But again, that would take an entire project. We'd have to send myself and a student. I need a student to help me up to Penn, stay for a long time, cover the cost of getting all that stuff scanned, then cover the cost of processing all that stuff and putting it into, preferably an e-document, so that students around the world can see what's really in a tomb, and for all people who are going to excavate a burial in the future, to try to give them some suggestions about what they may find in their tomb if someone tells them in advance. Thank you very much.
That was really good, Dr. Nick. So this was your thesis for Bachelor of Arts?
Yes, correct.
And then where did you get your PhD?
Well, I went to Brown University for my master's, and then I went to Yashha to do my dissertation research, but I decided I did not want to do that. I wanted to do that at another university. So we did our four-year Yashha project, and then I went to Graz, Austria, where the professor, when he found out that there was a Mesoamericanist in addition to many capable people, Karl Herbert Meyer, he invited me to give a lecture. And at the lecture, he assumed I had a PhD, so he said, I'd like to introduce Dr. Nicholas Helmuth. At the end of the lecture, I very quietly told him, excuse me, I don't have a doctorate. He said, well, come to our university. So I spent about, I think a total of about 8 years doing research, and wrote my PhD dissertation at the Karl Franz Universität in Graz. And that's on the surface of the underwater world. So water lilies and all that type of stuff. And that has been published in 1987 as a coffee table book with 727 illustrations. And it's cited and quoted all over the world.
All right. There's still people trying to come in. But I congratulate you, my man, for peaking at more than 100. I mean, this subscription to Zoom, you're supposed to have 100 participants, but I probably let or asked to admit another 5 or 6 at least. So I don't know if they were able to get in beyond the 100 or not.
Well, see, we sent a notice out to our mailing list today.
That's fantastic. So I see a lot of comments running along. Let me just go through those. But everybody, if you have any exact questions, please get them in now. Back when you were talking about the plates and the vases, Carl Calloway says these plates look like God El hats. And Edward Bowles says the plates look like battle standards.
The God El headdress That would be a very good thing to have that as a God-El headdress. I'll certainly look, because I certainly know who God-El is. Let me look at that. And as a battle standard again, what I would recommend is that the professors out there assign things like this to their students for term papers or for thesis.
And then concerning the artistic ability on the various vases, Susan Hoffman from Western South Florida says maybe the later ones were done in a hurry to be done in time for the burial.
That's what I think.
And Jimena from Lancaster, Pennsylvania, says that perhaps they were done by his family members, including the children.
I agree with that. I agree. It could have been either been visiting or it could have been his family.
And then when you were showing a jug, Barbara McLeod tuned in and said the jug reads SA for Atole.
So that jug has a glyph for Atole?
That's what she's indicating, yes.
Thank you.
Barb, if you want to unmute yourself and make a comment, go ahead. And then when you were showing the deceased teeth, Susan says he may have had more teeth than you, but he was probably a lot younger too.
I'm 77.
And Marlon Diaz says, as I understand, some of these rulers used to celebrate their 80th birthday. And I know Tikal the Great sure did at Palenque. And Marlon says, right, but the rulers were probably the exception. Joe Ashcraft says that the curved bones look like raccoon penis bones.
I'm not intimate with raccoon penis bones.
It's funny because raccoons run around our neighborhood. In fact, I saw the family, the mother, father, and two adolescents come by about 11 o'clock last night. And Katya is asking, could it be that the buried individuals were identical twins? Has there been any DNA analysis?
That's a good question. That would be up to the University of Pennsylvania to answer that. Because they have the skeletons. I mean, the skeletons are hopefully in Guatemala, but Penn had access to those skeletons.
So then Mark Van Stone comments that those curved blades set in handles in the toolkits are beaver incisors, great wood carving and engraving tools, hard enough to engrave bone or even shell, he believes. And then Susan's asking, where are all the materials from this tomb now? In a lab, in the museum? And Mark,
we turned them all into the lab. That lab, of course, the lab's not there anymore. So I would say the jade itself is in the National Museum. Right. So all the absolute incredible goodies are in the Museo Nacional in Guatemala City. The Jade Jaguar and other things travel all over the world for exhibits, obviously. The rest of the important stuff is up in the Tikal Museum. The Morley Museum closed during COVID, and I think it's kind of reopened in a building that used to be a Japanese research center at Tikal near the former airport there. So the Morley Museum building itself apparently doesn't function anymore.
Oh, really?
You have the monuments at the visitors center, and then across the road, you have a new museum. And I've not had time. We were so busy the last time we were there. We didn't go into that museum yet. We were just so busy taking pictures of plants and animals.
And then someone's asking, the little side stairs that you pointed out on your structure, do they face Temple 2?
No, the pyramid itself, the front stairway faces Temple 2's side, but these are on the side So they're only on the side. They're not on the front. They're not on the back.
Right. And to me also that could be the sort of if a royal was going to do a presentation at the top and the people were out in front waiting for them to appear at the top, this royal could sneak up one of the sides and then just appear at the top. You know,
That would be, but we also have to check whether on Temple 2 and on Temple 1, whether the stairways go up to final terraces or not. Keep in mind, the upper terraces are not very well preserved.
mhm. You know, I was living in Belize back in the 70s, and we would make our way into Guatemala and go along the Bandito Highway and go to Tikal. And we camp out in the campground at Tikal. But one time I was with my friends, and we were in Belize to open up a yoga retreat. So I was into yoga back then, and I climbed up Temple 1, and it's like at the top 3 layers of inner rooms, and I was all the way in with my back against the back room facing the doorway. And I started oming. And when I saw my friends a couple hours later, they said, "Were you up in Temple 1 oming?" And I go, "Yeah, how would you know that?"
Because you can hear it across the
They go,
plaza.
"You could hear it everywhere across the plaza."
No, there are several statements about different kinds of sound in the Great Plaza and other places. They were actually designed for that.
Uh-huh. Well, I actually, you know, self-realization. I didn't have to read a book. That was like, oh my gosh. And Mauricio is saying thank you very much from the Central of the Estudios Mayas in UNAM in Mexico City.
UNAM has one of the best universities. Mexico is filled with really good. Veracruz, all, Yucatan, Campeche, Quintana Roo, Chiapas, absolutely incredible. Many, many decades ago, Rus, who dug up the Palenque tomb, he invited me to give a lecture at UNAM because he had dug up the Palenque tomb and I dug up the Tikal tomb. So I gave a lecture at UNAM in person on the tomb of the Jade Jaguar when Alberto Rus was still alive. So I have definitely had memories of UNAM. It's I think it's one of the largest campuses in the world.
Wow. Huh. And then Carol's asking, the cloth that you mentioned was across the walls of the tomb. Were there any remains of the cloth set in the walls?
Yes and no. When they plastered the vault, that plaster or mortar dribbled down and caught in the cloth. That's how I knew there was a cloth all the way around. And it caught there and cemented itself in the cloth. The cloth, obviously, a piece of cloth hanging out in the jungle for 1,000 years won't be there anymore. But the imprint of the cloth is perfectly preserved. And we have photographs of that. And again, that's a typical reason why, if I win the lottery or someone can help me in a comparable manner, we would like to publish every single photograph and show this stuff and explain everything. Because again, our ability, because we were in the middle and on top of it and on the edge of it, we had an access to photograph kind of more stuff than you get in most tombs.
And that's exactly what Martin Dietrich, my coffee man, is saying. He says, thanks for the terrific presentation. And he expects there is so much more to say, that it would be a great contribution to the field of Maya studies to have a book on the tomb with all your beautiful pictures. Who else could do it, and who better to do it than the original excavator?
This guy had thank you very much. This guy had a quetzal feather headdress, the whole thing. Wow. And again, I would lift up a block and there would, again, the wooden vase I talked about was dented in on the wooden block. And I got to a point where I lifted up another stone and there was the Quetzal headdress. It was nothing but powder and it evaporated within about 10 seconds. But again, that's the sort of memory that I want to get into print. But I'm working on so many other things. And again, it would require a trip to Pennsylvania, and it would require one or more students to help me, especially even the student to go up there with me. And then plus obviously the funding for University of Pennsylvania has scanned a lot of these photographs, but their scanners nowadays, just a simple Epson Model 800 scanner can turn these negatives into incredible, unbelievable quality.
Do you know where the bones now reside?
Again, everything was turned over to the University of Pennsylvania Tikal project, and all that stuff was in a lab. That lab has been moved about, I don't know, 10, 20, 30 years ago, the lab was moved. So I would imagine some of the stuff is still in that lab.
And Marlon Diaz is saying a lot of the Sylvanus Morley Museum pieces are exposed now, or maybe he means exhibited now, in the new building called CCIT in Tikal.
Well, again, the Japanese had a huge facility there, and then for whatever reason, they phased it out. And that huge facility, as far as I understand, has replaced the building of the Morley Museum. The physical structure of the Morley Museum is still there, but it hasn't been open for probably over 2 years. And I was told that everything's in the former Japanese place, which is right directly across the street from the visitor center.
Okay, because another person via their iPhone is saying they were just in Tikal in May and the Morley Museum is still open and they saw the artifacts and art.
In the old building?
At the building in Tikal.
Well, see, again, the Morley Museum is a tiny little building consisting of one room.
Whoa.
And the Japanese building is a huge bunch of structures that had a whole research center. And when I was at Tikal in July or August or May or something, we were told that everything was in the Japanese facility. And when I had gone to Tikal earlier, the original Morley Museum was locked shut because of COVID. And again, the hotels were, most of the hotels were shut also. But that was 2 years ago.
Yeah. So, Marlon's now saying that what you saw in May was probably the CCIT exposition.
Yes.
Just next door to the old Sylvanus Morley building, which is currently closed. Yeah.
No, the Morley Museum is completely on the other side of the airfield.
Oh, wow.
So the Japanese facility is directly facing the visitor center. So when you come in, you either you park your car in the visitor center or you park your car wherever out on the airfield, and everything is behind you facing each other. The Morley Museum is across from the airfield and it was closed 2 years ago, and I think it's still closed today. Now, whether the new museum in the Japanese Center got the name Morley Museum, that I don't know. Because again, when we go to Tikal, we're only working on plants, animals, bees, orchids, bromeliads, aeroids. We're not doing the archaeological stuff.
And Bar McLeod is commenting, I guess after I talked about Oming, that she had conversations at dawn from Temple 3 to someone in Temple 1 at a normal speaking volume. That's amazing. And have you ever landed at that airfield?
What, for me?
Yes. In fact, when we lived there, in the 1970s, 1965, my parents flew in with me because my father was in the same class as William Lincoln in other words, my father's architectural university at Washington University in St. Louis. William Lincoln was in the same class as my father. And William Lincoln, of course, mapped Yasha and worked in Chichen Itza. So my father wrote Morley and said, "Oh, hello, Dr. Morley. I'd like to be a volunteer for you. Would you please accept me? I'm an architect." Morley never wrote back, never replied. So when Peter Harrison invited me to come to Tikal for a year, my father saw that as a way to, shall we say, relive his life. So my father and my mother flew down to Guatemala and we went up to Tikal together, and they spent the first 2 days there. And then I went off and did my year's work.
I got to land there one time too, but way back in the 80s. I lived in Guatemala for 7.5 years, and I worked. One of my jobs was working with. I was a graphic artist for Diego Molina. He was the most famous Guatemalan photographer. He did the original Nat Geo photos of the Quetzal, all of that. You see him in Nat Geo dropping down into the cave of Noctunich. But I had to work on finishing a annual report for the bank, one of the banks, and a lady friend came to visit me, and the first 4 or 5 days, she actually was a graphic artist too, and she helped me finish the annual report so we could go, and Diego arranged for us to fly to Tikal and back on a sort of military supply.
Like a DC-3, yo.
Yeah, the DC-3, and they had to, it wasn't pressurized, and they had to put in seats for us, because there was all the bags of beans and rice and everything else. But that's one of my best. But the other thing, there's also a cenote at what I think is the eastern end of the landing strip, and I've never seen that cenote.
No, there are there are 2 aguadas out there, but I'm not familiar. But some aguadas, for example, at Yasha, most of the aguadas are at the surface. By the way, are you going to show the anima video now?
Yeah, we're getting down towards the end of the questions. Chris wants to know, is there a burial under Temple 4, which was likely built by...
Yeah, they've not found one under Temple 4, Temple 3, Temple 5, or Temple 2.
Temple 3, Temple 5, but they found one under 4?
They found no burials, but see, that doesn't mean there are none there. It just means there are none on the central axis.
Yeah, it's too much into tourism now with the climbing up and the... And then Barb says, you got to sneak in and spend the night. Once the birds start singing and the wind comes up, the people start arriving, the amplification is lost. And Marlon says the acronym CCIT stands for Centro Conservación y Investigación de Tikal.
Yeah, that was the Japanese institute.
So Atula is saying that Burial 196 is fully described in Tikal Report 14, 1990 by William Coe. Pat Cuthbert published the ceramics in Tikal Report 25A, and I published the artifacts in Tikal Reports 27A and B. Nice to hear from you, Hatula.
Yeah, but the report, keep in mind, the official University of Pennsylvania report is very good, but it doesn't have the straight information directly from the burial.
And
the ceramic report by Culbert shows all the ceramics. And I'm sure Maholi Nagi and other very capable people show, all the tools and all that other kind of stuff. But what was in the tomb as a burial, I excavated it as a human being curious of what's in there and how it was built. I did not go in there as a ceramicist, as an archaeologist in that sense. I wanted to find out how was this built? Inch by inch, day by day, what went on in here? So my interest was completely different than any traditional archaeologist in that period.
All right, and then we're still going back. The one person thinks that the CCTIT museum is called the New Morley Museum,
Yeah.
but that only Stella 31 and 39 were still in the museum as of January 22. Yeah. And a great presentation, amazing presentation. My mention of a cenote is a reservoir. And Gail says, what a presentation. Your undergraduate paper, a magnum opus, but a preview of what was yet to come. And your work continues to amaze. I hope to see your photo project one day. And congratulations on the IG Nobel. So at this point, Carl, can you hear me? Do you want to unmute? And I'll ask him to unmute. He made a comment, so he must be back home now. But meanwhile, congratulations.
Yes, I'm here.
All right.
So-
Hey, Carl.
There we go. I'm not driving, so I'm pulled over. But it's a beautiful sunny day. Yes, Nicholas, you had a question as to the. I think you're referring to the profile head that's often found in the star bands. It's Thompson referred to it as the T1017 head.
Yes.
And it's that with the quatrefoil kind of squarish mouth,
Yeah,
which I think which Sheely would call the souk head.
isn't it all often called shiny head?
Yeah, it's shiny head. Previous names are souk head, and it was a real great sort of breakthrough to understand the distribution of that head through my iconography as well as through the epigraphy. Because in the inscriptions, it has a 1-to-1 direct substitution with the so-called mirror sign or the Celt sign, 1-to-1. Again and again, we see the T1017 head substituted with that ovoid Celt, that's usually on the body of gods, to indicate, that they're the so-called mirror sign to indicate a sort of resplendence. And what's even better, at Palenque, there's a wonderful jade bead drawn by Simon Martin. And the bead itself actually is the T1017 head. It is a 3-dimensional carved bead of that head. And there's a little inscription on the back of it. The inscription names the bead as that shiny, resplendent green jade item. So, but you're very right. Of course, it has a distribution throughout the classic Maya area, and it's the distribution is very, very consistent. And they attach the head to animals, to plants,
To the frog, to the toad,
to the frog, the back of the toad as well. So also to the skin or the bark of a ceiba tree, which which is young and green in the beginning. So anything that has a shiny green resplendent surface, sort of a waxy shiny surface that's like the surface of jade, gets tagged with that head.
Because what's interesting is that in the codices, that head is God C, the monkey god.
Yes. There's it's a little bit different, but I think
Exactly.
I think you're right. You're right. You're right. It's there. You're absolutely right. It may be. I don't know. It's an interpretation there, but it's very clear in the classic period that it has this 1-to-1 association with a bright, shiny, brilliant surface that is like in kind to the surface of jade.
Well, thank you. Can you send your email to Jim, and Jim, could you send me Carl's email?
I already have
Sure.
it.
And
Send it to you.
and what I'll do is on the presentation is December, I'll focus on that and I'll show you how the interplay between inscriptions, iconography, of how that head pops around and how it manifests. It's really, really fascinating.
All right.
And it's key to understanding the so-called Maya cross at Palenque.
Very good. Very
Yeah.
good.
Yeah, I think you're really going to enjoy it. So
All
thank
right.
you for the question. Yeah.
And I don't see any more questions. Beth Chambers says, wonderful presentation, Nick. I remember our El Mirador days.
Hiking to El Mirador.
So now I've taken off your screen sharing and I'm going to share your little, I think it's an 8-minute video of you tongue-in-cheek presenting all of your
Enema syringes.
enema paraphernalia. So I'm going to start it now and hopefully it'll be on your screen. Okay, does everybody see that?
No,
All right.
there it is. Yeah.
All right, here we go. Turn your sound up.
The enema is administered with a gourd. We couldn't find the correct species of gourd in this month of June, so we got some other gourds kind of as a joke. This is a gourd, and this is a thing that this is called a clyster, the syringe. This is what goes up your tailpipe, but this is kind of a joke. And you press down on here. Then here's another type of a gourd, and if you want to inject a lot, this is a joke. This is another gourd. This is all to be funny. And then here's a gourd. It's got his own injection tube. And then here's a large gourd, even larger than this. So again, this is all a joke. The actual gourd is the size and shape of this. And again, we couldn't find the gourd this month, and we went out to the farmer's market. So we made one out of a camote, because this is the exact size and shape of the gourd. And this, of course, is solid. This is a tube. But in here, there's some sort of a pressure thing where you press down and the liquid comes out. So that's it. These are the so-called enema jugs. We found these again in the farmer's market. We bought them, but we're going to have some custom made. We're going to look at all the ceramics and we're going to make them in the same size and shape. They come in many different sizes and shapes. And we're going to make a selection of those. We'll find a potter and pay them to make the actual enema jugs. And I must admit, I don't myself take enemas. That's done by the physical aspect, and the medicinal aspect is done by other people. What we're working on is the iconography, that is, what type of gourd is used. Again, this is a gourd, this is a gourd, this is a gourd. But again, as a joke, this is actually a jicada or moro from Crescentia, probably Crescentia lata. Looks like a gourd, called a gourd tree, and it's a musical instrument. So a lot to go. We'll be doing this scientifically, of course, but for this award, it's as a joke. It's fun. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Nicholas Helmuth. And to receive monthly issues of the Aztlander, contact me, your host, Jim Reed, at mayaman@bellsouth.net. Thanks for viewing.